So Christmas is over, or so we think. I know our gathering here on Sunday evenings is not usually the biggest, but this evening in particular, we have very few of us gather here. And I'm reminded of, the the Night Before Christmas poem by Clement Clark Moore. So where he goes, the first opening lines, "'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas will soon be there." The thing is, we're not here gathered on the night before Christmas. We already did that, and the house was jam-packed for 4 services. Basically, if you came late, you couldn't really find a place to sit. But like Moore's poem, things are pretty quiet around here. They're still and peaceful. And on this Sunday after Christmas, we find ourselves in a more relaxed worship time. See, for many, the Christmas time is over. Christmas decorations are being put away. And in here, our worship space feels a bit empty in comparison to the activities that transpired here a couple of days ago. And all of our hopeful longing for the coming of the Christ child, which has been injected with marketing, media, and public displays, has in a way come to an end. We hear that Jesus is born, Mary had a safe delivery, things are great, joy to the world, the angels came singing, the shepherds came to pay their respects. They were some of the first visitors. I hope they brought food for her after all the work she did. We sing and we say peace on earth and goodwill to all humanity. And in those words, we hear that Christmas 2013, as we know it and as we experienced it, is pretty much behind it. But is it really? For those of us who follow the liturgical calendar, we know that we are still in the season of Christmas. And the Christmas season, which spans 12 days, begins on December the 25th and ends on January 5th, right in time for us to welcome the Magi, the 3 kings, with their gifts of gold, myrrh, and frankincense. And although there is not much hoopla during these 12 days, we are, however, invited by the lectionary readings, for those who follow the lectionary also. The scripture passages that are selected during this time invite us to reflect on what's bearing this old story of God becoming flesh, God taking on human form, God coming to dwell among us. What does it really mean for us as 21st century Christians? One of my early church history professor, Dr. Amy Oden, used to call this the so what moment. It's basically, after reading some of the ancient texts, doing our readings for the week, she will engage her class and say, so what? What does any of this have to do with us today? So Christmas is over. The world has done its grandeur, a great grandeur of it, and now it's all gone. Or as the world has seen it, Christmas has come, Christmas is gone, Jesus is here, so what? And I'd like for us to ponder that for a moment. For me, in 2007, I was fortunate to travel to my home country, Liberia, West Africa, after being away for almost 11 years. I was there for 3 weeks, and while I was there, I spent just about every single day in tears. I cried for my country and my people because the effects of the Civil War had left the country in absolute destruction. The capital city, Monrovia, which is named after President James Monroe of the United States, was overpopulated. Actually, it still is overpopulated, and people were living in very deplorable conditions. I went during what we call the rainy season. So the rain we had here today has nothing on the rainy season in Liberia. because raindrops are almost this big that fall from the sky. So imagine that kind of rain falling just about almost every day. And people who are living in their homes are zinc shacks and little mud huts all around, some places around the city or on the outskirts of the city. So because of that, and there are not many paved roads or alleyways in Liberia, so all of the mud from all the rain just goes into people's homes, and they have to deal with that. And everywhere I went while I was in Liberia, I just saw just devastating situation after devastating situation. And it made me angry. I was angry at our leaders, but most especially I was angry at God. I was angry at God, wondering what it is, or why is it that God is not doing anything for God's people? Does God not care? Does God not love us? Do our presence not mean anything to God? And I remember sharing my pain and frustration, anger and disappointment with one of the guests of my father, who in return asked me this question. Chenda, I see you're angry. I see that you're disappointed. I see that you're hurt. This is your homeland. This is the place you grew up. But let me ask you this. Where do you see hope? Where do you see hope? And for me, as I read our text this evening, that was kind of the question that kept coming up to me. Where do you see hope? Now, the words that were read by Dr. Fuller really, when you read them, you don't think of a hopeless situation at all. The prophet Isaiah writes, I will recount the Lord's faithful acts. I will sing the Lord's praises because of all the Lord did for us. For God's great favor toward the house of Israel, God treated them compassionately and with deep affection. It's almost like a psalm or words of praise, words of thanksgiving. You are excited and remembering everything that God has done for you. But the thing is, the context in which this passage was uttered, or these words were uttered, was a time in the history of Israel after they had returned from Babylonian exile. You see, when they returned home, they saw that their beloved homeland laid in ruins. There was devastation all around them. The temple had been completely destroyed, and there was pagan worship everywhere, and they felt hopeless. I imagine, much like me, after going back home, the Israelites were filled with anger and frustration. They were disappointed as they scoped the devastation and ruins of their beloved homeland. I imagine, much like me, they spent days, maybe weeks or even months, lamenting their shattered land. I imagine they wondered about the presence and love of God for them. And I imagine probably somebody going up to the prophet Isaiah and asking pretty much, or sharing their disappointment. Where is God in the midst of all of this? Where has God been? Does God not care anymore for us? And then the prophet Isaiah probably asking in return, I hear you. I feel your pain. I know what you're going through. But where do you see hope? Where do you see hope? Now, civil war and exile is not the lived reality of those of us gathered here this evening. But nevertheless, we are still inundated with hopeless circumstances all around us. From what we see in the media to what we experience in our personal lives, hope can easily be obscured. You see, with frequent mass shootings in this country, we wonder if there will ever be an end to gun violence. With the slow decline of unemployment, we wonder if people who are searching for jobs, if they will ever find any good employment, anything sustainable for them to be able to care for their families. With people who have friends around them getting married and celebrating, they wonder if that will be their life experience. If there is somebody out there for them, is their life set to be for them to be alone. With the expected and sometimes unexpected deaths of loved ones, we wonder if the pain of the loss that we feel will ever go away. And sometimes even those who are in relationships or partnerships with others find themselves maybe at a juncture or a point where disagreements and arguing has become normal, and they wonder if their marriage will survive. Now, these things and so many others often leave us paralyzed to seeing hope manifest in our lives. But our text reminds us that there is a way for us to combat the hopelessness that we often see, that we often experience. And it's by remembering. This is what this passage is about. It's calling the people to remember the faithfulness of God. Isaiah says that, Isaiah reminds the people, he shares with them, this is where your hope lies. If you are going to get through this, whatever it is, this destruction here of Israel, of Jerusalem, of Judea, if you are going to overcome this, if there's any hope that you're looking for, I want you to look at the ways in which God has moved throughout human history. I want you to remember how it is God was with your ancestors. I want you to think about their liberation from exile in Egypt. I want you to think about how it is God brought them through the Red Sea. I want you to think about how it is God provided for them in the 40 years of wilderness wandering. How God sent manna from heaven for them. And how God provided water from a rock for them to drink when they were thirsty. These are the things I want you to remember. These are the things that are going to help you get through. So whatever it is any of us gather here this evening are facing, let us remember the time in our lives that we saw and experienced the faithfulness of God. Let us go back to that time and place where we saw God most present and with us. Isaiah reminds the Israelites by saying, our story does not end with what is around us. This is not the end. You see, for Isaiah, he reaches to the very center of the Israelites' faith to remind them of God's good deeds from the foundation of them being God's people and God being their God. He recounts for them God's gracious deeds, God's praiseworthy acts, God's unbreakable love, God's compassion, God's redemption, because they are God's children, God's people. And God has gone to extreme measures, to extreme lengths to show them that God loves them. And we, as Christians, hear again the story of how God took on humanity. How God came to a young girl and asked of her an impossible thing to do, to bear God's son. And how in that time, a young lady who's expected to be married soon for her family and her fiance to learn that she's with child, and how that could have been utter social disgrace for her. But yet God was with her, and she gave birth to a child in a manger, in the most unlikely of places, in what probably could have been, might have been, probably was a hopeless situation for her. And I'm sure you're wondering if I ever answered that question. Well, I had to, because I was in my second year of seminary. So I could not just go without answering. Where do you see hope, Chenda? For me, that year I saw hope in the many boys and girls walking several miles to the rural mission school where I grew up, so they too can receive an education. I saw hope in the teachers who, though they went months at a time without a livable wage, still sacrificed their time and their energy to be present for these young children day in and day out, so they can pass on the knowledge that they had received as well. I saw hope in the women who held prayer vigils, the women who fasted for the nation and for the church. I saw hope when I heard the initiative of the president of Liberia, an initiative that focused on every girl child receiving an education, which meant that no longer would the young girls in Liberia be thought of as second-class citizens, that they too will have a chance to go to school, that their place is not only in the home, that their place is also out in the world, where they can become doctors and lawyers and engineers and scientists in order to leave their imprint in God's world. I saw hope in the Israelites. In Isaiah's words, heard hope. Words that he brought to their memory of God's loving kindness that transcends all times. You see, for to us a child is born, a son is given, so that we can know hope, so that we can always be a people of hope, so that whatever our situations may be, so that we can recall and remember that God has acted on our behalf by coming into the world to journey alongside us, to feel our pain, to know our grief, to know our distress, that God has made God's self known to us from the very creation of the world by seeing the good in each and every one of us. You see, through this baby, through this child, we know a God who feels anger and tenderness, anguish and optimism, despair and hope.